what does it take for someone to really explore and live by their true values?
Pain, frustration, pain is probably the best thing. When you start feeling burnout, when you get all these symptoms where you don't feel comfortable, emotionally you don't feel comfortable, and you feel that you're stuck somewhere, wow, that's the best wake-up call. This was during the terrorist attacks of Zaventem. Those that were physically present, most of them changed their careers. CEOs changed their careers. I heard them say, at that moment, for instance, what the hell was I doing there at that time? I've been working all my life trying to get the financial security. I've missed a lot of the evolution of my own children. And then I look at them and I said, so you're afraid, you can't sleep correctly? No, I don't. You're afraid of disease? Yeah. And you're afraid to die? Yes. That's great news. That is so cool. Todd looks at me. He said, what are you talking about? I said, well, if you're afraid to die, that means you must love living. Where do you get that from? He said, yeah, I do. Well, what do you do to prove that you love living, that you enjoy life? Wouldn't you want to use your time focusing on that? For me, it makes sense. I mean, we are heroes of our own stories. We can be however you wish. You can be a coward or you can be a hero. You can choose. I ran and I thought about my father, who I was really close to. And I remember this, my father was not at all religious, but he used to hum this song. It's Shalom Aleichem Malachei Hasharet. It was that song. And I started singing this song. And it was I felt my father's presence somehow with me. I was not alone. And I had this burst of energy. So I had already ran about 100 kilometers, more than 100 kilometers, I think 150. And I started picking up speed. I said, what's going on? This was incredible. My sister, my beautiful sister, who had terminal illness. And I had signed up for Gobi. I'm running 2025 for her, for association, for a charitable association, Asperger Amitié. And my energy, hopefully, is her.
Welcome to the next edition of Beyond the Bubble. And it's a huge pleasure to have here a friend and someone I so much appreciate because he's been an important figure in our life for many reasons and someone with a lot of wisdom and a great perspective. So Simon is a psychologist, a marathon runner, and not your average marathon runner, but an ultra marathon runner in the desert. He's an author of children's books. He is a musician. And he is just a very colorful person, as you can tell. Simon, thanks for being here.
Hello, Andras. How are you doing? It's a pleasure coming here. Honestly, it's an honor and pleasure because, on my part, I think you are extremely wise, very interesting, highly intelligent, and very, very sensitive. So
I didn't bring you here just to praise me,
being invited by people like
words.
you is an honor, of course.
Amazing. So you define yourself as French American or American French or a citizen of the world?
Probably, I don't know if citizen of the world, but I would say more, from my mother's side, she's Ukrainian, French Ukrainian. My father was from Polish descent. He became an American citizen. He left after the war. And so I was brought up originally in Paris in an American base. My father was an American soldier. And then he became an officer later on. We traveled in the States. I sort of anchored myself in Clovis, New Mexico. This is where I probably get all my roots from. Perhaps that's the reason I like running in the desert because that's where I was brought up. And then we left to New York. And then from there, my father was stationed in Belgium, where I was brought up in an international school. So I met a lot of people there, so multicultural. But essentially, I feel myself Europeanish, American, so...
of both places.
Yeah.
And in which language do you count, and which language do you yell?
Good question. Wow, psychologist. Spontaneously, it would be, if I get upset, it would be in English, of course.
In English, okay.
And if I were to count spontaneously, it would be in English also.
Right.
So you're asking how do I dream? I dream in colors and images, and sometimes we shift from French to English. And French would be probably more poetic. Sometimes I get more inspired through the French language.
And when you write, because you're an author of books, and we'll get to that in due course, but you write first in English then or French?
It depends. It really depends. Because as we'll see later on, I'm inspired by children. All these stories are based on true stories, on really the children that I've seen. So if of course I see a child and I do therapy with them in English, then of course it comes in English because his words come out in English, and so I'm inspired in English. And if I have a French patient, then of course some of the words and some things that come from him naturally, spontaneously, I use it in my books.
Yeah.
So to give you a little example, one of my young clients came up to me and said, you are my personal small therapist. Which means in French, it comes from French, tu es mon psychologue, pas psychologue, not psychologist, psychologue, and petit means small. And I use
Beautiful.
that. Yeah, you could be small and powerful at the same time. Yeah, so sometimes
it reminds me of the movie Rain Man,
right?
Yeah. Like how Raymond was, I think, his brother, but then couldn't pronounce it and came Rain Man.
Absolutely, yeah.
Just this, it's much more than play on words. There's a lot of meaning to it
behind the words, yeah. And so this girl, of course, said, and rather than saying psychologue, she couldn't pronounce it directly. She saw me as a small therapist, petitologue. Yeah. There you go.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So you're a therapist.
Yeah.
And so which school, so to say, do you follow in your therapy?
Okay, so I was trained as, well, we're going to peel out the onions. There's something you didn't know about me because I was a physical therapist before. So that was one of my degrees. So as I was doing physiotherapy, I found out that this is not really the field that I really aspired to be. So I did some training when I worked at the hospital as a systemic therapy, so family systemic therapy. That means trying to understand the family system, how our identity has been constructed through the cultural system, through the family system. So I did 4 years of training in family therapy and systemic therapy. Then afterwards, I did my bachelor's in psychology, and then my master's in psychology. And when I did my master's in psychology, I decided to invest more in coaching, behavioral, CBT, psychology.
Yeah, cognitive behavioral therapy.
So it's more like behavioral therapy. And then also I was lucky enough to be invited to different workshops in hypnotherapy, where I was one of the translators of Milton Erickson's disciples, the father of hypnosis.
Yeah.
Right? Jeffrey Zeig is one of his disciples, and I was next to him when he was doing his training, so I was trained at the same time.
In hypnotherapy?
In hypnotherapy.
Tell me more about that.
About hypnotherapy?
Yeah.
Well, hypnotherapy is just like when you're in a situation where you feel totally powerless. Why you're powerless? Because in your mind you start believing things. You start believing and you start eliciting emotions. Okay, so actually you're using your mind that elicits emotions, that elicits behavior, right? So hypnotherapy, what it does is does the same thing, but it helps you in the positive way. What it does, it tries to put you in a different state of consciousness so that you are aware of probably different attitudes that you can take, different behavioral techniques that you can handle and that you can invest in that is more aligned with and we talked about it, your values. So in other words, you focused on the values that are really important that make you change behavior in a positive way. So when you're challenged because you're perhaps scared of something, you're scared of being judged, sometimes, of course, your emotions take over and you can't really behave yourself in the right way. So what we knew in hypnotherapy, what we do is help the person go in a state of consciousness where they're aware, deeply aware of what is the best attitude to take. Being able to compare the attitude of fear, which makes you behave in a not very constructive way, or the attitude of wisdom based on your values. And
sorry to interrupt, because I'm wondering that in a hypnotic state, so you put a a patient or a person in a hypnotic state.
Right.
And then you, as a therapist, you guide them through your words,
Right.
right? In a certain direction where you give them the possibility to change course.
Absolutely.
Is it a correct understanding?
Yeah. You're actually, what you do is, of course, you guide them based on what you know about them. That's why the bond is extremely important. Of course, you could do hypnosis with people that are influenced. You can influence them if they really want to be influenced. But this is not my role. My role is to make sure that they have agency. They're able to control their own lives. So there's a bond that is connected. They believe in me. They know that I know their story. And then I bring them in a different state of consciousness, a little bit like when you're watching a movie and time just goes right through really quickly. You're actually invested in the movie. And then sometimes you have messages in the movie that says, wow, why did I think about that? That is so that reminds me of my own personal life. It's the aha, the awareness. And so you bring the person in a state of consciousness where time and space is probably different, a little bit what you feel when you fall in love, or when you read a good book, or when you watch a great movie. And that brings you in a different state of consciousness. Your brain behaves in different ways, starts vibrating with different waves, has access to different parts of your brain, and that helps you.
What I'm wondering about is, watching a movie, reading a good book, or getting into that flow state, that's great. It's a positive experience.
Right.
Whereas I'm thinking in hypnotherapy, the main use is to let go of bad behaviors or bad convictions about the world,
Right.
and rewire it or turn that into something more healthy. So what I'm saying is, it's probably it needs to be more therapeutic and based on something negative.
Yeah.
So how can you get into such a positive state while being in that negative frame?
I'll give you, that's a pretty good question. I'll give you a little metaphor. Imagine, for instance, you've been dragging around negative thoughts that really burden your life. Like, for instance, I don't know, fear of being judged. And that's linked to your background, to trauma, okay? So the metaphor would be, for instance, and I'll give you an example, would be, so imagine, for instance, you're in a place where you feel extremely comfortable, where I bring you down into an atmosphere where everything is serene. That's what we want. But in the background, you see this hot air balloon that looks majestic, that looks beautiful. And as you get closer, in the gondola of the hot air balloon, it starts smelling really bad. There's a contrast between the atmosphere you're in and this beautiful, colorful hot air balloon, and in the gondola, it starts smelling so bad. This is the metaphor. And as you get closer, you ask the client or the patient to look a little closer what's inside the gondola, and it's all on his fears. Everything inside is about his fears, with dirty stuff, with things that he wants to get rid of. But the only way he can get rid of that, he has to use his values. And coincidentally, at the base of the gondola, there's a sword with values. Like Excalibur has, all swords have something that's written on it that's based on values. And you're asking the person, would you like to cut the cords that really anchor this gondola to the ground, that stops you from acting correctly? And he says, how could I do that? Well, use your values. Use your values. Put your fears away and put your values. And so in hypnosis, for instance, when you see him cutting through the fibers of the cords of the rope that's holding the gondola down to the ground, and that's been there for a while because of his fears of being judged, and he cuts through it, and he imagines the scene, and he sees the gondola and the hot air balloon soaring into the sky, taking more and more distance to his own body because he's using his values, his sword. Physically, he feels a difference. He's in a state of consciousness where he says, wow, my fears, I have agency. I can get rid of my fears, but that means I need to use my values. And so watching a movie or hearing a story where you take it as your own story and feeling physically how it feels doing that, that's the first step.
I'm hypnotized.
And then
You did the trick just by telling me this. Yeah.
second step is, okay, now that you have that in hypnotherapy or in EMDR techniques, we can go through that later on. Okay, now that you became aware that when you claimed these values as yours, you claim it as yours. What happens is that you put proximity with your values and distance with your fears, and you say, okay, let's test it out. Imagine a scene where you're going to be challenged. What are you going to do this time that's different from the other times? And so you see the client or the patient start thinking about it. He's starting processing.
It's already kind of building in.
He's claiming things. And he would say, hey, I probably will act this way. Why? Because it's more coherent, it makes more sense, it's aligned to my values.
Let me pause you for a second. So when you say values, I think values are just so fundamental. And I recalled off camera, but I repeated on screen, that you and I were at a lunch, I think it was about 3 years ago.
Right.
And you may not have even remembered that, but I remember that vividly because you came in there, it was with a group of friends, and everybody, there was this tour de table, everybody saying some input.
Right.
And you immediately spoke about values. And at that point in my life and at that point where I was, it just spoke to me so deeply. Understanding that this is such a core determinant of the way you live your life, the way you want to comport yourself and make decisions, while it's often so invisible. So I want to hear your take on, when you say values, I think everybody understands on a cognitive level, but what does that mean on a deeply personal level? Are people even aware of their values?
Yes, they are.
Are they able to identify those intuitively, or are those kind of hidden, it's like a hidden operating system that you don't necessarily see?
Very good question. Most of us are aware of that, of course, but we're more aware when we feel uncomfortable. Whenever you're being challenged, there's a physical discomfort. You don't feel good. You don't feel good, and sometimes we don't know exactly why. We don't feel, but in the therapeutic level, we don't feel good because you're not aligned with your values. There are things that you would want to do, but you don't because of your fear, because of judgment, and so you behave in a way that doesn't correspond to what you really aspire to do or to be. Now, these values are constructed through our identities. Our identities are constructed around the interactions you have with your father, with your mother, with your family, with the social, with your friends. That's how you construct values, education, cultural values, And so these values are part of ourselves. Sometimes these values are inhibited because, for instance, your father would say, like he would say in some cultures, what you say is not important yet, or don't speak yet. At the table, you have no right to express yourself. For instance, I'm giving you an example.
Mm-hmm.
So suddenly, the person starts identifying the values as if speaking in front of people is not important, whereas actually it's probably making you're struggling between, I want to be spontaneous, but I'm not allowed to do so. So sometimes values
or maybe to say, well, can I express myself? Do I have the right to express myself and really speak my mind?
Absolutely.
Or in some places, you might get the message from early on to say, who are you? You're nobody yet because you're a youngster or because you're ignorant compared to the elders, and you just shouldn't speak up. So you build that into your foundational system.
Absolutely, based on the cultural aspect. But you have general values such as empathy, such as being helpful, being creative, interacting with the world, and you see kids you can actually notice that when you see kids playing around in playgrounds during recess, the way they interact with the world, themselves and friends and teachers, the interaction, the way they define the world is based on their values. You could already see. Like, for instance, if there's a favoritism, you can see a child probably being highly frustrated because of his favoritism, and his values is equality, for instance. Or when somebody is being harassed, the values of some children is being helpful, and their values are already part of their identity. And generally speaking, you can see them later on. If they want to invest in a career or their future job, it's probably something that's around social or human settings, for instance,
It's so interesting because it makes me think of basically every school has values. Depending on the educational approach they are taking,
Yeah.
depending on the country they are in. But again, even inside a country, there could be a million different ways of a school prioritizing certain behaviors or accepting or not accepting certain things based on their values. And I think parents intuitively try to look for some school or place of education for their kids that aligns with their values, but it's not always obvious because sometimes a primary value in a school could be order above everything,
Yeah.
and not necessarily the well-being or the emotional balance of a child.
Absolutely. So, and that's it's very inspiring what you just said. Our values. We all have realms, kingdoms. Like you have the kingdom of a school, right? Imagine, and in all kingdoms you have coat of arms. The coat of arms, like in God we trust. So you have coat of arms that define the philosophy of the kingdom, the philosophy of the school, the philosophy of the family. Our philosophy, our personal philosophy. In other words, you, Andras, you define yourself. You interact with the world with your values, and that's your kingdom. Your kingdom is based on a certain amount of values, like a coat of arms. And of course, you welcome, like the school welcomes their students, welcome aboard. But these are the values that we invest that are linked to our personal history. You're welcome aboard, but these are the values. Like you're welcome aboard to be my friend, or to interact with my world in my kingdom, but these are my values. And when you don't respect those values, either the person that enters your kingdom or you yourself as a king, you don't respect your own values, you don't feel comfortable.
Absolutely. Reminds me of one thing. Until probably, I don't know exactly, but I'd say maybe around the time that conversation happened that I referenced 3-5 years ago, first of all, I wasn't even aware of the importance and the permeating nature of values. And number two, I was living by certain values which were not exactly, I wouldn't say not my values because those were the ones I was living by, but I no longer identified with those, and yet a transition had to happen. So what I'm saying is some people are brought up in a way or kind of eased into through their upbringing and through the different events in their life, well, they live by certain values, and those may not be the most positive. Say, financial security could be a primary value, and say money over everything, and you need to create that financial security, even on the detriment of sometimes cutting corners or worse. So, and I'm not saying I was doing that, I'm just saying that those kind of values need to be changed. Or at one point you come to your life and say, hey, everybody lives by values. They just may not be the right ones or the ones that they truly want to live by. And I think going back to your hypnosis, to say, hey, they limit me. They bring me to a bad place. They bring me into bad relationships. They bring me a lot of conflict in my life. So I need to upgrade my software. I need to change them somehow. So how do you see the transition where you realize that, okay, my values, the one that are manifested in my way of life or in the way I run my things, are not conducive to a balanced, happy, fulfilling life?
Okay.
How do you change that?
Okay, first of all, the where and why. Where does it come from and why was it set? Like, for instance, I would say this concern about financial stability. Where does it come from? I would give an example. Because we were poor, because we lost everything, or we left the communist countries, and we had to, start having more, learn how to construct your own life, financial stability. That's where it came from. So, of course, the education was, where does it come from? Well, it comes from my parents, from their background. And why? Because they were really concerned about giving us the best possible education. And that's where it comes from. Oh, right. And that's why I decided to devote my time working for a company, or being a CEO or whatever in a company that where I get financial stability. Okay, that's where it comes from. But what do you really want now? Well, to be honest, I always wanted to be an artist. I was a violinist. My parents say that that's not you can't. It's not a guarantee that you can actually have financial stability. Oh, do you think about that often? Well, I really didn't think about that too much. So these are the questions that you raise as you move forward. Where and why?
And you raise that as a therapist with
Of course, because you can't, and you have to accept the fact that these people we all have been, we've all evolved through through those values. Our identity has, so you can't insult them saying, it's not. It's all that is very important. It helped them live. It helped them interact with the world.
Cope.
But absolutely. So what happens is later on, as you evolve in life, as you get older, you start thinking about, hey, what can I do with my second half or my third part of my life or my other quarter of my life, whatever. What is it that really has more deep meaning and purpose? And so you let them really just invest in that and process that, and knowing that there's a moment where you're saturated. There's enough of what you were expected to do or how you wanted to protect yourself. I'm giving you an example, for instance, investing and make a lot of money or giving the financial security, but at the expense of what?
What does it take for someone to really explore and live by their true values?
Pain, frustration, pain is probably the best thing. When you start feeling burnout, when you get all these symptoms where you don't feel comfortable, emotionally you don't feel comfortable, or you've got a depressional state, or existential crisis, and you feel that you're stuck somewhere. Wow, that's the best wake-up call.
I really appreciate you saying that, because I was expecting you to say courage, but I think courage comes later. Because first you need a very strong push, a trigger,
right,
to say, hey, something is off. And unfortunately, the way we're wired, it has to be pain, emotional or perhaps a physical or any other, but some sort of a very harsh trigger that shakes you up, which has such intensity,
right,
to really completely upset your life, so you can start on a better course.
Yeah, discomfort, absolutely. You had a guest that came here, Elizabeth, right? I heard the podcast, and I've noticed that in my career, I've been confronted with people that were challenged. I'll give you a little example. This was during the terrorist attacks of Zaventem. You've heard of Malbec Zaventem, where I had
The airport. Yeah.
at the airport, where probably 95 or more of my patients that were confronted with the event, either indirectly having seen the event on television, who had PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, just having watched the scene on television, or those that were physically present. Most of them changed their careers. CEOs changed their careers. I heard them say at that moment, for instance, what the hell was I doing there at that time? I've been working all my life trying to get the financial security. I've missed a lot of the evolution of my own children. And there's a wake-up call. They realize that there are probably things that are more important than, for instance, what they thought was important at the time. And believe it or not, most of them changed their careers, or either asked for a demotion to be able to have more space and time for their families, their values of families, or others. I've seen some people open their own stand selling waffles where they were CEOs of companies because they wanted to interact with people. So
it doesn't surprise me a bit. What I deeply empathize with is how difficult it is that it has to take such a traumatic event, and for others it can be maybe the passing of a loved one, or for themselves having maybe an accident.
Yes.
And just to have that wake-up call, but there is this initial period when you have no clue what's happening, the fear, that you're desperate, you're just completely lost in this storm. Before, hopefully with help of professionals like yourself, where they can see the reason of that, or that trigger was really there to reroute them towards a better direction.
Absolutely, Andras. As a matter of fact, you're asking yourself, why does it take so much a major challenge, an incident, to have people change their lives? And I keep saying to myself, therapy doesn't have to be long nor serious to be effective. Doesn't have to be. You could put a lot of humor in it, you know. And so I tell my clients, I said, thank you so much for this therapy. How much do I owe you? Because I don't want to go through what you did in order to change my own life. I have to be close to my values and understand what I aspire to be profoundly, and have then the courage to be able to say, okay, I'm going to have to let go of something in order to embrace something else.
It's as simple as that.
Well, I tell them most of my time, I do say that. I said, how much do I owe you for this therapy? Because you're going to help me more than anything else. I realized something.
And when somebody sets on that course, or what is the spark, or what is the moment where when a coin drops and they realize that, okay, this, I wouldn't go as far as looking at destiny and the spiritual side of it, that it happened for a reason, but looking at a moment when someone realizes, even a very down-to-earth person realizes that, hey, this is an opportunity more than a tragedy.
Okay, so that's a very interesting question. That's why I write my books, because I'm not a serious type of person. I'm not the therapist that takes himself seriously. I don't want to act like a therapist. I'm a storyteller. I'm somebody that puts some humor in some things that are incoherent. So what I do is, when I reveal the incoherency of what a person is saying, I just pop it up through humor. I'll give you an example.
Okay.
For example, a child that comes up to me and says, Simon, I can't sleep anymore. I have anxiety. I'm afraid to die. I'm afraid to get all these diseases. So first I listen to the child. Okay, I try to understand where it comes from. And then I look at him and I said, so you're afraid, you can't sleep correctly? No, I don't. You're afraid of disease? Yeah. And you're afraid to die? Yes. And I look at him, I said, that's a great news. That is so cool. Todd looks at me, he says, what are you talking about? I said, well, if you're afraid to die, that means you must love living. Where do you get that from? He said, yeah, I do. Well, what do you do to prove that you love living, that you enjoy life? Well, I do that, I do this, I do that. And what could you do to be a healthier person? Well, I could eat this way, I could do some sports, I can listen to music. Wouldn't you want to use your time focusing on that?
This is kind of the bullseye thing, because it's an amazing way. That's where the cognitive behavioral therapist comes out in you, where you take something and you help reframe that in a positive light. How deep does it go? So can a child with that fear and attitude really shift their frame of mind?
When the child understands that you understand their story, you create a bond. You're a little bit like their guide, okay? And of course they're flexible, but they're being listened to, the magic of being listened to, the recognition, and also the ability to say, hey, I can probably focus on something else rather than my fears. I can focus on something that really gives me vibration. So that it's the magic of the interaction between you and the child, and how credible you are, feeling that they're not being manipulated. I'm a child when I work with children. I ask questions. I'm really curious. I'm really curious to find out. When a child comes up and says, I'm afraid to go to bed tonight because there's going to be like monsters, that's part of my books, for instance, that are going to be underneath my bed, and there's shadows, and I say, wow, those shadows do exist. They do. Where do they come from? And so I where do they come? I'm really asking. I'm not making fun of them. And so where do those shadows come from? Are they like shadows, like Peter Pan shadows that where he's changing, or are they real? And then he realized that those shadows are part of the furniture. Oh, so your mind really starts creating, makes those shadows probably more monstrous, yes. And I asked him, you know where that comes from? He's not really. I said, well, I'm going to give you a little lesson of how our brain created all this. I pull out a brain. You want to see my brain?
Yeah.
I always have it with me. Where are you? Well, there's already one half here.
Okay.
Okay? And I'll pull out, where's the other half? You can't work with half a brain. So, see, I've got all sorts of, in here I've got also paraphernalia, like magic stuff and symbols for children. What I do is I pull out the brain and I said, this is your brain, right? And inside your brain, we have incredible things. We've got different parts of your brain that are made for, conditioned to protect yourself. And of course, our ancestors, they didn't sleep on beds. They slept down on the ground. We're predators. We're out there to be able to serve themselves.
Devour them, yeah.
Of course. And of course, our brain was processed for shadows, for noises. Okay. And of course, it's extremely sensitive. But we have another part of our brain, which is a cognitive neocortex, prefrontal cortex, what I keep saying to them. And that part of the brain is a gift from nature, or for whatever you want to call it, where you can process rational thoughts. And the rational thoughts is, oh, I know my other brain was there to help me, our ancestors, against predators. But now I live in a house. We're in 2025. My parents are around. Police is around. We have watchdogs. So I can allow myself to sleep correctly. Everything's going to be okay. And so I make music. I compose music. We can listen to that later on how they can use music to understand how their prefrontal cortex works, for instance.
I can totally see
this is the brain.
I can totally see a 9-year-old talking about prefrontal
They
cortex.
do it. They sing it. Look on my website. You'll see they all sing the story of how the prefrontal cortex works, how the limbic system works, how the reptilian brain works.
I love it. You're training future neuroscientists, and that's commendable. So tell me, how does that come into your book? So we definitely give a plug to your books, which is
thank you.
Here are the Magicians, and which is a French and English. I wouldn't say children book because that probably limits its description. It's more than that. You mentioned it's a bit like the Little Prince book and some other classics where it goes way beyond a kid's story because there's a very deep message in each of them. So tell me more about that.
I was deeply inspired by Frank Baum, the author of The Wizard of Oz. When I was a child, I remember, this was in New Mexico. We were watching the movie together, and it was black and white at the time. And
I've seen the black and white. I remember.
Well, actually, it was colored. It was colored later. Oh, it was first black and white because it was with Judy Garland played the role of Dorothy, and it was black and white. And then once they go into in the land of Oz, Emerald City, it becomes colored. It was Technicolor at the time. Right. Yeah.
Exactly. Because I remember I was confused. Is it black or white?
Yeah.
Exactly. Because when they were first in Kansas.
Yeah.
And then they got into
a barren land where, okay. And my friends, how old was I? I was probably 7 or 8 years old. My friends, they were smiling and laughing at the movie. And I looked at them and I said, it's not a funny movie. And they looked at me, yeah, it's funny. I said, no, it's not funny. And I already had the notion of values, the values of courage, the lion, of the scarecrow, intelligence, lack of
I played the Tin Woodman in high school.
Right.
In English class, we did actually the theater production.
Really?
And I was the Tin Woodman, yeah.
It's a marvelous movie. It's a great movie. The Tin Woodman, the compassion heart. And the wizard, who's not a wizard, is a very bad wizard. He's just there, and what he does is he's able to elicit the values of all those the characters of Dorothy, of the Scarecrow, of the Tin Woodman. He's able to do that. He's using actually their own resources to become powerful, to empower themselves. I had already a notion of that. And I said to myself, one day I would like to write something like that, but I don't want no plagiarism. It has to be through my own experience. So I was extremely inspired with Frank Baum's books. And my books are much close to a little bit, inspiration of those of what I felt when I was a child. As a matter of fact, the magician, he's quite interesting. You'll see. You can see the magician in my books. He's really funny. And I always wanted to write books, but with no experience. And who brought the experience? My patients, my children. Oh, my child. First my child, then the patients. And the first of the stories is Julia, the scaredy cat. It was written I wrote it in French and English at the time. I shifted between both languages, but it's based on a true story. Julia is a story of my daughter Julia, and she is a great artist. And somehow she was selected to sing for the Voice Kids. You heard of the Voice Kids, France? She was selected to sing and to be part of the contest. But she thought it was a game, so she went through the casting. Castings, 5,000 children, and you bring it down, narrow it down till you have about only 20 or 30 children left. And she was happy to be chosen and be selected. And then what she heard as she was getting practice with the instruments, the orchestra, the accompaniments, those that have to accompany her as she sings, she was hearing behind the stage comments, saying this guy's going to win. How was this child chosen? This person has no talent. How is it possible to go on stage when you have no talent? It's all it's
rigged or something.
Something like that. And then as she heard those comments from parents, she said, "This is not a game anymore. It's really a competition, and I'm going to be probably getting rid of or put aside, or it won't be good enough." And then she had horrible stage fright. And she said, "Dad, I really want to stop. It's too much for me." And I went up to her and I said, "Okay, if you don't want to, I understand. We're not going to push you. But tell me what's happening. People are going to make fun of me. I'm not good enough." I said, "Do you want to be helped?" And she said, "Yeah, Dad, help me. You're a therapist." I said, "I'm not your therapist. I'm your father. So I'll do my best. I'll be a father, but I'm not your therapist." So we were sitting at the foot of our tree. All this is true. And as she was speaking to me about her fright, about what's going to happen, there was a robin. The robin is there. Incredible. And that is the source. That's what changed. And as she was speaking to me about her fears, there was a robin that was about 20 meters away and that was hopping closer and closer. And I realized the reason the robin was getting closer is because the female robin was building its nest in our shed. And he wanted us to focus on him rather than the nest. And so this is where my therapeutic metaphors come in, provoking. I say, "Don't you think the robin should be scared?" She says, "Yeah, he should be scared." "And why isn't he scared?" "Well, I think because he has values. I think he's responsible, and he wants to protect his female and the offspring." And I ask her, "What's important for you? And what are your values?" And she says, "Singing. And what else? Is sharing what I love." And I say, "Don't you think that should be more important than how people perceive you?" And she says, "Yeah, Dad." I said, "Well, it's all yours." And that's how the story started. Julia, the robin, and the great magician. I loved writing it. I had so much fun writing it. It was so fun.
But you got to tell me what happened with the contest. Did she go back?
She went. Of course she went. And then she went through. It was televised. She went through. First stage, second stage. She was, and then at the second stage they had her select 1 out of 3. It's a kids competition, so they don't want to it's always humiliating when you have one child that just leaves the stage, so they have 2 children that leave the stage. But when she left the stage, she went up to me and she said, "Dad, it was so fun." And I said, "What did you get out of it?" "Well, I won. I won because I actually, I did what I had to do. I shared what I loved to people." And that was it. So she didn't win, but she won in a certain way. So that's how the story, Julia, about, stage fright and being also being afraid, not being good enough, that's all based on that. And it's translated in French and English. You just flip it. and it's going to be translated in 5 languages. And so that continues, and the same goes, that's for Julia, the same goes for Giovanni, the shy, same thing. It's all based on the same, the difficulties, the discomforts that the child feels with the difficulties, and the Robin and the great magician is going to do one thing, what I always do with children, elicit the values, elicit the resources. There are deep messages inside, very, very profound messages with therapeutic messages. So I'm using my experience with children, with situations that really occurred, and I just make them part of the character, and being helped with 2 main characters, which is the Robin and the Great Magician. So with messages, and it's a lot of humor because I'm a funny guy, so I have to stay funny. I'm not going to make it extremely serious. So the messages are through the books. And as you go through the books, what I like about it is that you could read it at all ages. When I visit schools, teachers read it, and they say, hey, I could use it for me. Parents could read it too. So, and you could read it, and as you read it, you evolve. So the messages that you interpret as a 6-year-old will change when you become 9, when you're 12, when you become an adult. Hopefully, that's what I want.
Yeah, no, I love that because I think there's incredible power in storytelling. And you mentioned that you define yourself as a storyteller.
I am a storyteller.
And storytelling is all we got.
Yeah.
No, it's all we got. We tell stories about our own life.
Right.
The whole narrative of since the day I was conceived, not even born, but conceived, all the way until this moment. It's a story. And the more you can put that into a red thread, and the more you can find a consistent narrative about it, perhaps the happier you'll be, or the more you understand yourself, and therefore the happier you'll be. Does that stand?
For me, it makes sense. I mean, we are heroes of our own stories. We can be heroes of our own narrative. We can be however you wish. You can be a coward, or you can be a hero. You can choose.
Can you?
Of course you can choose, because you have discomforts. Whenever you're challenged and you're being challenged and you feel uncomfortable, it's because you're not doing things correctly. You're not doing things the right way. You know, like the devil in Judaism, they do not exist. It's angels. They're angels that are not put in the right position, in the right place. They're out of place. They feel uncomfortable.
Do you always have agency? Because I think you do always have agency, but you don't necessarily always think you have agency. Because there are these pivotal key moments in your life.
Yes.
Sometimes it's entirely clear because you had an accident, you had a divorce, you had something tragic happen, but sometimes it could be a much more mundane moment, but a moment of choice. Do you take that bribe? Do you push that person to do something against their will? Right? These are moments of choice that can really be a fork in the road. Do people always realize those moments?
I don't think so, because if they did, I'd be out of a job because they'd be free, right? So I think that what's extremely gratifying and interesting in our life is we are challenged. We're always challenged. We always learn about how to be better people. So we can't have agency right away. We can learn from our mistakes. We can learn that we're stuck somewhere, why we're stuck, why it happened. That we can. And that's already agency, being able to say, oh, I understand where it comes from. I was stuck, and I'm still right now, but I know where it comes from. I know why it's happening. That's a form of agency. Now, acting upon it is something else. But of course, anything that is, things exist because first we think about it. Things are not created like that. First you think about it, it goes through imaginations, through concepts, understanding, and then action. But I think agencies, thinking about it is a form of agency also.
How does agency and fear relate to each other?
That's a good question. How do agency and fear relate to each other? Am I able to act when I'm stuck, or am I able to act to free myself?
Even in a positive way. Let's say I want to start a new venture. I want to write a book. I want to quit my job and open a waffle store.
Yeah.
But I'm afraid that I'm not going to have money, it's not going to succeed, or I don't have the ability. So again, there are a lot of limiting fears,
Right.
even if I feel I could have the agency.
I like that. What I ask is the magic word, why you want to do this? We don't care about agency. Why do you want to do this?
So you're not asking why are you afraid?
No.
You're asking
Why do you want
to do it.
why okay, you want to write a book, but why? Why do you want to write a book? If the person says, I want to write a book because I want to be famous, well, it's going to be kind of difficult. But if the person starts saying, I want to write a book because I have ideas I want to share, and the why becomes more and more dense, but more stories in the whys, more emotions with the whys, it becomes so dense that you're going to have to try to do something about it. It starts enticing actions.
You don't take superficial answers as answers, right? Like you
No.
want to keep pushing a couple of layers down.
I want to go deep. Why? Why do you want to do this?
And a good answer for that could be, I want to express myself. I feel I have important thoughts, or even if I don't, I still want to express myself.
When it becomes compelling, when the whys, the person starts explaining the whys, and there's like a deep vibration, like some urgency, compelling, then things can start happening. The why.
Yes.
If
Absolutely.
the why is superficial, well, it's going to be kind of difficult.
Take the waffle example. It's a banal example,
Yeah.
but still probably a good one for our purpose.
Yeah.
To say, well, because I love the smell of waffle, or I want to make some money. Yeah, those are not good reasons.
No.
But to say, I want to have the freedom to have my own style of waffles, or to be among people and have chats with my customers because I want to connect with them on a human level, right? Now you're getting closer to a real why.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you could see as the person speaks and tells, and his narrative is being constructed, the sparkle in his eyes. He starts moving. You see the body language. I say, hey.
Because there's energy there.
Yeah, and then you draw a timeline and say, when do you want this to happen? So you project the person. When would you like this to happen? There. How would you start? Then we start. Then there's an action plan.
And it leads me to a question that occurred to me as you were explaining all of this. How does change happen? When a person decides that they do want to change course and there's an important decision to make, be that career, private, or even something more mundane as to renovating their home.
Good question.
What's the...
You ask very, very intelligent questions. I would say double frustration. The frustration of being where they are and why they're being where they are, and the frustration of not doing what they want to do, and there's very little time left. There's potential time that has to be used. Beyond that, it's over. They realize that. It's about time to move.
I'm not challenging you. I'm putting here something because someone close to me would like to change his situation, mostly a professional situation, and is not doing it. And I really attribute that more than hesitation, it's more of a blockage to self-limiting beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, because I think those are just so paralyzing that a person...
Give me a concrete example. What's the example? What is it about?
Okay, so he's in a job that ultimately gives him much more frustration than pleasure. And yet he has this self-limiting belief to say, I don't have the right to change this. I cannot do something very different, even though I have that desire in me to try myself in a different way or leave this kind of business for now. And I have ideas where that's coming from.
Okay.
But again, I don't think he does.
He needs to know where it comes from. He needs to know where it comes from. And
First
how
of all, it needs to know that it's there.
it's there.
And number two is where from.
Where does it come from? That's the first. And then he finds out, why he decided to nurture that belief. He needs to know. That's
Because it serves a purpose, right? Like it's a protection mechanism for the most part. Something that got ingrained too deep, and it's no longer serving him well, but it's still there.
He needs to know where it comes from.
And once he does, what happens?
And then you say, how is it aligned with what you really want to do in life? I'll give you an example. Could I give you a couple examples?
Yeah, absolutely.
So this client of mine was working with his father for many years in a very, very important elevator company. And his father was a narcissistic guy, never recognizing what he did, what his son did, and making him believe that without him, the father, he would be a nobody. And that his son, he should really thank his father for having given him the possibility of working in his company, because this will give him some kind of stability. And he has a family. The son, my client, has a family, and he can't afford to leave something like that. So his belief is that if I leave, my family's going to be put in danger, and I'm a nobody, anybody. Who's going to take me? Who's going to offer me another job? And then I ask him, oh, that's where it comes. So that comes from your father, right? Right. So do you do your job correctly? He says, yeah, of course, all my clients love me, right? They recognize you? Yeah. What about your dad? Never. He never went to my graduation. He never went to my football matches. Anytime I sign contracts, he says, it's normal. I said, would you like to be, how do you perceive yourself? I'm nobody.
And yet, I'm assuming he's a high achiever.
He's a high achiever because he doesn't want to disappoint his father. And he's afraid that his father will probably just fire him.
I know the phenomenon well. So someone who's a high achiever and yet looks at themselves as nobody, because never got that external validation early on. Later it's less important, but early on to say, hey, what you did is pretty good.
So the first thing I say is, if you were to interview all the people that value your what you did, what would they say? So I ask them to process. I'm not talking about your father. What would they say? I'm a hard worker. I'm a people lover. I love people. I like being with people. I am extremely responsible. I'm curious. And I said, with all these attributions, with all these criteria, what are the odds for people that would want to work with you? A high achiever, responsible, that love people, that are experts in their field. What are the odds? They said, well, they're pretty high. I said, well, think about how people perceive you and integrate that process. This is who you are.
That's, I think, where the difficulty is. Because, again, the messages that he was brought up with, again, without knowing your client, but understanding the phenomenon, it's a blockage, right? Like that there's this almost impermeable brick wall where he cognitively understands that he's actually an amazing person because of everybody out there, and yet his inner protection mechanism doesn't let that go in.
Okay, that's where the magic operates. You ready for this? That's where I start using my humor and when I start provoking people. I said, we've been seeing each other for how long so far? This is about 10 sessions. Why are you coming here? Because I find that you're pretty good, I guess. Okay, right? What about your clients? Why do they always contact you? And what is it about them? Because they are intelligent, sensitive people. And I said, I think you're extremely insulting. He looks at me. He doesn't dare. You are extremely insulting. These people that believe in you, that say that you're able to do your job anywhere else in another company, and you don't believe them, they're sensitive, intelligent people, and you don't believe them, you're highly insulting. Starts thinking, sorry, but I got to use it sometimes.
No, but I love the highly conscious therapeutic use of provocation.
Yeah. Once the bond is made.
Obviously, that once the bond is made, meaning the other person understands that you're coming from a good faith
Absolutely.
position.
I'm
You're
not
not there to
manipulating.
provoke them because of your own ego or
No.
just for the fun of it. That there is the trust already.
I'm not
established.
manipulating, using your hands to move from one place to another. No, I'm coaxing them. I'm asking them to take a look in another perspective. Take a look at this perspective. Don't look at your fears. Change. Look at in people's eyes. See how they perceive you. This is who you really are. You have to nurture that, and you have to feel that inside your body.
Because that's exactly what you're doing. The person's self-image is actually very different from the reality. And you're trying to say, hey, shed this. You no longer need this. This was the wrong message you received because of your family legacy and the personality issues in your ancestors. But this is the true one. Hey, you got to align with this.
And that's absolutely, and that's what really, that's what I try to deliver in my books. There's a lot of provocations, a lot of humor. There's a lot of compassion. It's not like artistic compassion. It's compassion, really, empathy, understanding. And so, in the books I write, there's of course you can provoke, but with compassion. You can provoke. You say, "Hey, listen."
I'm stealing that that idea.
Of
Yeah,
course.
I mean provocation with compassion, because again, provocation is a pretty negative term for the most part, but the compassion means you do that because you genuinely want the other person to take something positive out of it.
Absolutely. And when you see in this person, the person perceives in your eyes that you actually see him with high potential, with resources, and you look at him and he sees that. What are you doing? What are you doing? You're using those mental blocks, and it's really stopping you from doing something that really will. What are you doing? And that's when. So actually, as I speak with those clients, I see myself. I say, "Hey, wait a second. This is pretty interesting. It works." So I'm going to write it in my books, and so you'll see that in the books you can actually. All these kids says, "This you're this character. Is that you?" Yeah, that's me. So coming back to my client, he comes up to me and says, "It's been all my life I've been working with my father, but it's going to be betrayal if I leave him." I say, I don't know if it's going to be betrayal, but what I know, if you want your hot air balloon to take off, or if you want your hot air balloon to take more height, you're going to have to let go of the ballasts. And those ballasts are heavy. They're precious sometimes. You're going to have to let go of something if you want it to take, more height and more distance. Loyalty, that's probably a risk, yeah. But that's something that you're going to have to probably let go. In the name of what? Of recognition that you haven't had for all your life? Think about it. We have time. You've done it for 20 years, so,
All right. And I'm happy you brought that up. That's such an important concept in a situation like this, but even more generally, because we talk about personality and change and all those topics where the term betrayal, what does it refer to? Well, it refers to loyalty.
Mm-hmm.
And loyalty to what and loyalty to whom?
Absolutely.
And especially, are the person or institution or workplace or situation, does that share your values? Because who's betraying whom at a certain point? Because maybe they had originally betrayed you, even though you found that it's a one-way street, that you need to be loyal to that workplace that never appreciated you. You need to be loyal to that family member at times who may have mistreated you. So which way does it go? Who's loyal to whom and who's betraying whom?
And absolutely, you're absolutely right. I have so many stories. You're inspiring, incredible, because now things pop up. So I'll give you an example. The story of, could I tell you another story, or is this all right?
Absolutely.
Story of this girl who was always helping their parents. They were from Morocco, and her responsibility was to help their parents, bring them in Belgium, help them with everything else. And she had devoted all her life, all her time in helping her parents. She was the eldest of 5 siblings. And She came up to me. She was getting panic attacks, and we found out where that came from. Not burnout, but really physiological disorders. And we found out that she was actually spending so much time, to help her parents because she had this responsibility. And that culturally, you don't betray your parents. That's not how it is. And so she aspired. She said, I wanted to go to uni all my life. And university. And so I asked her the why. Why? Yes, this for these reasons. And it was so important for her. Yet, how could she spend, she was supposed to invest time. That means really, spending less time with her parents. It was a dilemma for her. But anyways, as the sessions progressed, she found out that she had decided to perhaps invest in studying. She actually, after a couple of years, she had her degree. But her fear was betraying her parents, which was horrible. And culturally, which I know, I say, what happens when, for instance, if one disappears for whatever reason, death? What happens culturally? Oh, well, the next to the eldest takes over. That's what happens, right? A little bit like during the war, the captain is killed. Who takes over? The sergeant. He doesn't know exactly, but the captain's dead. That's it. So, and I said, would that be a tragedy if you decided to leave the responsibility to your second? She says, it's not a tragedy, but you don't do that. I said, okay, well, then you think about it. Anyways, she took her decision. She decided to study, with also the feeling of guilt of having done this. And I said, believe me, something probably you're going to be very disappointed. I said, why? You're going to be quickly replaced. And she said, really? So she was relieved. And then she comes up to me a year later. She says, you know what? I feel betrayed. Why? Because I was quickly replaced.
Yeah. So, and that, I think there's a lot of moral to the story.
Yeah.
And again, it's more than a story. It's someone's actual life. You want something to happen.
Right.
You want to quit that unhelpful situation. And when it does happen, you feel, damn, am I really not that important?
Yeah.
So it just goes,
and
like careful what you wish for kind of situation where if you get it, it still comes at a price.
Yeah. Absolutely. But is that the question, are you willing that you're going to, not only you may betray, like the client with the elevator client, whose father was the part of the director of the elevator company, but I'm going to betray him, okay? But also, you might not miss your father. He may not miss you after a while. It's going to happen. It might happen.
Yeah.
Are you willing to accept that?
And I think it just shows how complex human beings are, because it's not like you flip over a switch, and then you're in a new situation, in a new job, new relationship, and then living happily ever after. You can still long for the old one because you were used to it, even if it was very unhealthy. Maybe you were very unhappy in that. You still, even after quitting, you say, oh, damn, it gave me a certain... It's a bit like a wound that like there's some infection and you take it out and there's still a wound and it still needs to heal. It's not like you're immediately cured and it's no longer there, even if that toxic or negative part has been removed. So I think it's just how complicated we are as humans.
It's this this comfort zone, what we consider more or less comfort zone, what you're familiar with, you know where to go, you have the social bonds, you have your monthly payments, this comfort zone that we have, which sometimes that we don't want to get rid of because we don't know what's going to happen. We know what we have, we don't know what's waiting for us behind the corner,
I've a short summary of that comes to mind. A comfort zone is not always comfortable.
No, it's familiar.
But you're still in it. It's familiar.
It's familiar, yeah.
Yeah.
So actually what I usually do is, this is my attitude. You have people that say, there are people that say, what's behind the corner? And others say, what's behind the corner? What's
Right.
out there? Another says, what's out there? And that's linked
There's
to
an
their
audio
own,
version of this that we're going to put on the Spotify, but I
well,
think from the tone of your voice, it's clear that one is full of fear and the other one is full of excitement and curiosity.
absolutely. And the client, the elevator guy that I call, well, what's out there? Well, what's out there? Things can only be good. Your father used to say, be very careful behind the corner. You know, something's dangerous. It's not at all guaranteeing that you'll succeed. But when you have so many intelligent and sensitive people that see you as a curious person, a responsible person, a human person, somebody that has a lot of experience, what's out there? What's out there? What's behind?
I think there's a very difficult, delicate balance between the desire for control, which often comes from fear, and then that playfulness, that trust, that confidence, that even if it goes wrong, it's not going to go that wrong. Or it's a controlled risk. It's not a mindless risk. I'm not going to jump off the bridge and hope I'm going to be fine when I land in the water. I do it with that bungee jumping. I do that with the parachute or other tools. So it's a risk, but it's a controlled risk.
Absolutely.
Be that opening a business, writing a book, or opening that waffle store.
In the name of recognition, freedom, living your dreams, there's always a small risk. But this life is we learn from life. What I usually say is when you look back, you're going to be like 85, 90 years old. You look back and you say, hey, am I proud of what I did? Is this really what I wanted to do? Imagine that. Imagine that you're 80 years old, 85 years old. You look back and you say, hey, this is pretty good. Or I should have done something different. And then suddenly a miracle happens. You're 85 and somebody comes up to you and says, you know what? We have a time machine. You can go back, but that's the only chance. You can go back. What are you going to do? So what I do is I pull them out into the future. You look back and they say, I would have wanted to do this. Really? Well, you know what? You have a second chance. This is the only chance.
It's a helpful exercise. And that's a good segue, actually, when we talk about comfort zone and all these ambitions, that I want to ask you about your running or jogging or marathon or ultramarathon. So you're not only running marathon, but you do that in the desert.
I'm not. I used to be on. I'm not a marathon runner. I'm an ultra marathon runner, which is very, very different. I mean, okay. I've had the experience of running many, many kilometers. I train about like 60 kilometers a week. So, and I've done this ever since a child. I loved running. It's just like running is like, it's inspiring. It's contemplative. You can really contemplate. You're alone. You have your own legs that can carry you away. It's amazing. You're in contact with nature. I had that probably because of my bringing up in Clovis, New Mexico, and open spaces. It's something that I've always liked to do, and so I've participated in many 20 kilometers run in Belgium, but I hated it because you have like 200 people that spit and fart in front of you when they run. Sorry to make it so blunt, but in front of you, on the sides, behind you. I needed space. I was a pretty good runner. I did pretty good, but I needed space. So basically, I always ran my own distances on my own. And then I took the challenge. I remember this was only 2022. I wanted to run. I had like a project of like 30 kilometers or so, and it was raining that day. It was a Sunday, and so I decided to do a stationary bicycle on my screen. And I was just biking, and I said, hey, I want to imagine that I run in the desert. So I look on YouTube, running in the desert. And there I saw Racing the Planet. Racing the Planet is an organization where they organize running in 4 deserts: Antarctica, Atacama, Chile, Gobi Desert of Mongolia, Namibia Desert in Namibia.
You said Antarctica at first.
And they do Antarctica, yeah.
And that's
the 4th.
considered desert?
It is. It's desert. There's no plants.
But it's ice.
It's a desert. Desert means no plants grow or very.
So not necessarily
bland.
hot.
It's no. It's a desert. It's cold desert. It's cold, but it's a desert.
So even ice could be cold desert.
Well, they say it, so I believe it.
Okay.
Anyways, I hit that program, and there was this program on the runners of Racing the Planet, And I was mesmerized. I saw that. I said, this is exactly what I want to do. So I'm 65. So I was like 2000. I was 62 at the time. And so I go, and my wife, Anna, looks at it. She said, what's happening? I said, this is amazing. She says, well, why don't you look at, there's a website. Why don't you ask if it's possible? So it was a Sunday. I finished biking, and I write down to Susie. So her name is Sue. And I said, this program was fascinating. I'll be honest with you. I'll be 62 years old. I've been running all my life, but is this for me? Just 10 minutes later, she sends me an email. Simon, you've been running all your life. There's 70-year-olds that run there. You're not there to be first to get a prize. You're there to have fun. And I said, really? Could I do it? She says, of course you can do it. What is your weekly plan? I said, I do that. Okay, so here I was. The next week, I signed up for Namibia. So
Okay.
I had 1 year to train. 1 year. And to be honest, everything's possible. I'll tell you what happened to that year. You want to hear the story?
Absolutely.
That first year was the most horrible year of my life. First year, well, I started running, and then I had a small bunion on my left foot, which was pretty. I could run, but after 30 kilometers, I felt the pain. So the first thing I had to do was get operated. So I got operated. So that after the year, you have 6 weeks of physical therapy. You can't run right away. So I started training, all pretty good. 6 weeks, started training, slowly, running, picking up, projecting myself in Namibia. Wow, it's going to be great.
All the mental tricks in the book.
Yeah, it was giving me vibes, and I was actually healing very well. Then I started running, and then about 3 months later, damn it, I feel something. I've got a hernia, a small hernia. I go see my doctor, and he says, listen, it's not at all bad, but if you get a hernia in a desert, you can die. You know that? You can die from infection. You can die from a blood that's not circulating. You need to be operated. I said, really? He says, yeah. So I said, okay, I'll get operated. I get operated. Good. He says, I start training again. Then there's COVID. You remember COVID?
Well, I think I do.
COVID starts. I weave through COVID, no problem whatsoever. Nothing.
Wait, but that was 2022, but
This
COVID was a bit
before.
Yeah.
There was COVID before, right? So
Yeah.
people had it, right? So I
But
was
you got COVID, you mean?
No, I didn't get COVID. I was training for 2022, right?
For 2022.
2020. I was running for 2022, so this is 2021, right?
Okay,
Right? So
got it, yeah.
COVID and stuff, and I get sick. My wife, really, she's hospitalized. I go to the hospital. She coughs in my face. I never get COVID. Nothing. Everything's okay. I feel strong. Cool. But strangely enough, I start coughing, getting weird stuff, losing a little weight. And I says, you never cough this way. I said, it's pollen. He says, no, you should probably go see somebody. I get an x-ray. The guy looks at it and says, uh-oh, there's something wrong. Oh, damn. So I go see a pneumologist. He says, let's scan it. There's something really wrong. And he looks at me. He says, you probably need really deep treatment. I said, what is it? He says, we're thinking of cancer. So I have huge ganglions between it's not my lungs, it's on the mediastin. It's mediastin, it's on the side. They do a biopsy. I'm waiting for the biopsy. I start meditating, hoping that everything's okay. Biopsies, they can't really figure it out. They say, we have to go and get what's going inside on all those 5 ganglions. Surgeon calls me up at around 9 o'clock in the evening. You're in surgery tomorrow. I said, I can't go to surgery. He said, and I start coughing. So I hear you're coughing. You go to surgery tomorrow morning. So I get up, do surgery. They pick it out. I'm waiting a couple days for it. Believe it or not, I caught tuberculosis. The guy says, it's good news. It's tuberculosis. It's not a lymphome. I said, how did I get tuberculosis? And then I found out that I used to do Krav Maga, Krav Maga, boxing and stuff in a small place in Charleroi where people were coughing in my face. I probably caught it there. So during my training, I had been operated, find my bunion, hallux valgus, double hernia, and I had been under anesthesia for biopsies, and under treatment for tuberculosis, which is like a cake load of antibiotics, which I was taking.
Not exactly the best way to
Great.
prepare for a marathon in
All the
desert.
treatment is finished, everything's cleaned up, and I start training, and I go to Namibia. So that's the story. And I said, this is going to be a great moment, because if I manage to go through this, I could go through that.
So what's the Namibia challenge? How long do you need to run? What's the temperature?
So it was one of the hottest moments of the seasons, of the previous seasons. We hit 43, 44 degrees. You imagine?
That was insane.
It's it was.
I said that with a lot of compassion.
It was. I'll tell you, it was incredible. But so it's a 6-day run with, well, it's 7 days, but six-day run with 1 day rest. So it's 40 kilometers a day. It's self-supportive, so you bring your own equipment, your food, dry-freed foods, electrolytes, and you run 40 kilometers per day, except 1 day, which is 80 kilometers. It's a full day. It's an 80 kilometers. So
in
it's 40.
The heat, in the sun?
Well, no, you know, because in the evening you don't have, it's clear. So you run all day. So it's, of course, in the sun, yeah. So it's you run at 8 in the morning, and then usually it's about, for others, it could be like 8-hour run. I had a pretty good average. I did pretty well.
Is it like sand?
A lot. Oh, you'll see the pictures. Dunes, like what you see in Tintin. You know the dunes in Tintin. You probably heard of the real dunes where you climb dunes, like it's about 100-meter or 80-meter high dunes.
44 degrees.
And some moments where it's less dune. You got like dried plants, dried fields, cracked, the cracked fields where everything's cracked. You got some beautiful valleys. You got huge lunar landscapes. It's like mesmerizing. So you see this incredible landscape, and sometimes you're it's so mesmerizing that you forget where you are. It's so beautiful. Your feet just take you there. So it's 40 kilometers a day, except 1 day where it's 80 kilometers. So you run during the day and during the night. So some people finished at 11 in the evening, good runners, 1 in the morning. Others, they do around the clock, So, but it's a 250-kilometer run.
We talked a lot about psychology and given your take. How do you mentally keep yourself motivated in that?
Well, first of all, it's the why. Why do you do this? Why do you want to do this? The why is so intense. So I always ask myself, why do I do this? My whys are extremely convincing for me. My whys are so convincing. I know why I'm doing it. So the whys, if you want to, I could go through that if you want to. It's because it's humility. It's understanding your body, listening to your body. It's camaraderie, where you meet people, incredible people. It's the beauty of nature. Nature provides so much incredible energy, like you can't imagine. It's the respect of nature. When we run, we see insects. You don't stomp it. You let them go through. I wait for them to go. They cross my path. I wait. Insects, whatever. You have this incredible respect for nature, for people, for your body, and I need it. I need it. I just need it, and it makes you understand that your body could go through many, many trials, and you have incredible resources. I was thinking of the death walk, le marche de la mort. My family went through Auschwitz concentration camps, managed by miracles to survive. And not only that, they had to walk with nothing in their guts, nothing left, no family left, no food, no energy, just death in front of them. Had to walk 20 kilometers with almost bare feet. They managed to do that. And I, self-supportive, in Erasing the Planet organization with medical attention needed, of course you can do it.
You're in the wrong job. You should be a motivational speaker.
Really?
Yeah.
No, I'm not good at it. Because I'm not a businessman. I'm just a talker, that's all.
The integrity that comes through. is what gives the energy, because you are very aligned with yourself.
Yes.
And you're very clear. You walk the talk, literally and physically, where you're clear about why you do what you do. And I think that liberates so much energy
Mm.
that can be then channeled into those things. And I so much appreciate that. And it radiates
Really?
that energy that I'm
Oh.
sure will come across also on the screen and
Oh.
in the speakers.
That's nice. That's nice to know.
No, I really mean it.
Well, thank you. It's emotional. But getting back to this Racing the Planet, this I'm gonna be running Gobi in a couple weeks. It's a 250-kilometer run. I'll explain to you why I'm doing this more than anything else. I need to tell you this about this. But what inspired me too was I remember when I was running the 80-kilometer run. So this was part of the next stage, which is 80 kilometers. So I had finished I was on kilometer 45, 50, and it was around 9 in the evening or 8, I can't remember exactly. So you have an option. The organizer says, do you want to rest, eat or something, or sleep for a while? You can decide now, but if you don't, you have to continue on to the finish line. Well, the other stage. And I remember I looked at the guy and I said, how do I look? He says, you look pretty good. I said, do you think I can make it? This is my first ultra marathon. He says, no, you look pretty good. Believe me, if you go now, you won't regret it, because if you start resting, it's going to be hard to reorganize yourself. Take a little drink, take some electrolytes, some energy bars, and go. So here I go. Now, we were only like 61 runners left, 60. And when you run 80 kilometers, you don't see anybody anymore. They're all scattered. People stop, so you're all alone. So
you've got the space you so much deserved.
Oh, you got it.
Not deserved, so much desired.
Yeah, absolutely. So here you are in the evening with your frontal lamp. Of course, you have little flags that show you the way every 200 meters or so. But sometimes you don't see those fluorescent flags. Sometimes you're lost. They're behind dunes or they're behind a hill. Sometimes you say, where am I? Where am I going? So you go back. But anyways, I was there running. There was no one around. And I was not alone. I didn't feel alone at all. I was running. And then you see this moon that's dipping in the horizon. You see incredible stars. You see part of the Milky Way galaxies because you could see it. And you are so small, but yet so conscious, so powerfully conscious of how small you are, but you're not alone. And here I was running another 35 kilometers or 30 kilometers. And I don't know what happened. I had I saw some lights in front of me far, and you could see, because it's dry, the desert is dry, so you can see from very, very far. And I ran, and I thought about my father, who I was really close to. And I remember my father was not at all religious. He used to go to the synagogue once in a while, but had nothing to do, didn't know religion. But he used to hum this song over and over again at the synagogue. Somehow, I started singing his song. It's Shalom Aleichem Malachei Hasharet. It was that song. And I started singing the song. And it was I felt my father's presence somehow with me. I was not alone. And I had this burst of energy. So I had already ran about 100 kilometers, more than 100 kilometers, I think 150, yeah, at least. And there I was with 80, another 50, another 30 kilometers left. I don't know what happened to me. I started running, picking up speed, more and more, humming the song. I had never ran an ultra marathon before. I had all these operations before, and I started picking up speed. I said, what's going on? This was incredible. What's going on? And then I started and then I bypassed one of the runners, and she looked at me. When you bypass, you ask if everything's okay. You know, you don't just leave them behind. Is everything okay? Do you need help? No, fine, Simon. And she says, Simon, did you take anything? I said, no. She said, go on. And I kept running. And then I was going, and then you see the campfires coming up because you're at the stage, you're entering the 80 kilometer. And so from very far, you can see the glimmering of the light from very, very far. But very far is like 8 kilometers. You can see it because it's so dry. And I started picking up speed because I want to go there. And then finally, they were waiting for me at 2 a.m. because you have no times, and I arrived more than an hour and a half before what was expected. I arrived there, and one of the organizers says, you were running downhill. We were wondering if you were on a bicycle or something. I had no experience, very little, And so I made it there, and I felt good. I arrived at 12:30 in the evening, felt good, relaxed. I could have ran another 20. And I'm not an expert ultramarathon runner. So I was actually using all my resources. Hope. I had, of course, trained before. I had my fathers. I had, beliefs. It helped me. It was amazing. And so that gave me, I said, okay, I'm going to do that again. So the story, if I continue. So I prepared to run for the next ultramarathon. Was supposed to be held this time in Jordan. I had prepared, I signed up, and I couldn't run because I was running in Jordan. It was during the moment, a couple of weeks after what happened. I didn't have the guts to run in a neighboring country, having fun, challenging myself with the war that was happening. So I wrote to the organizer. I said, listen, my heart isn't, I can't do that. I just can't run. I'm going to have to withdraw. And could we transfer it to another race? And he says, yeah, we can understand. We'll try to transfer it to another race if needed. But somehow, I guess, and I kept it a secret. It was like an internal message. I didn't want the other participants to be influenced from what. Yeah. But what happened was they had canceled before. They had canceled right after me. They had anticipated what happened, and good thing because I couldn't run under those conditions. So I transferred my run to Gobi 2024, June 2024. Unfortunately, my closest sister, they're all close. My sister, my beautiful sister, who was president of an association called Asperger Amitié. She saved so many children from Asperger with, the social difficulties. My nephew, her son, was Asperger, and she had saved him. She had created this great association in France. And she had terminal illness. And I had signed up for Gobi. And then I went to see her as much as I could to see her. Her name is Miriam, incredible woman, a fighter. She was, I didn't know that, but she had cancer, and she, 4.5 years ago, she was to live. Actually, the diagnosis was like 6 months. She managed to, I don't know how, to pull for a couple of years. And I remember I told her, Miriam, I'm really struggling. I don't know whether I should go to Gobi or not in June 2024. And she says, Simon, don't ever do anything for me. Do it for you. And I said, if you want to go ahead. Don't worry about me. I'm okay. I had a hunch. I said, listen, I don't know if I'll go. She said, don't do anything for me. Do it for you. And so I visit her, and I see that her, she's doing less well. And I remember that the week before she died, I went up to her and I said, and she looked at me. She said, "You didn't go to Gobi." I said, "No, I didn't go to Gobi. I'm not running in Gobi." I said, "I told you." I said, "No, I wanted to do something that I wanted to do, and for me, it's to see you. That's what But do what you have to do." I said, "I want to be with you. That's it." And she passed away the day I was supposed to leave to Gobi in 2024. So now I'm running 2025 for her association, for a charitable association, Asperger Amitié. And my energy, hopefully, is her. It'll give me more energy, more than my muscles, more than my heart. It's something perhaps, hopefully, more powerful than that. Why am I doing it now? I'm doing it, okay, contemplation, humility, energy, but I'm doing it for something that is so noble.
I think it makes perfect sense. And that's where the real energy comes from.
Yeah, absolutely.
From the meaning.
So I've got the little banner in my pocket on my tent. She'll be with me with my electrolytes, my water.
With your cured hernia. Yeah. Beautiful. Simon. Let's have our cards.
Okay.
Yeah?
So I pick out of the blue. You don't
You
shuffle
pick it
them?
out of the blue?
You don't shuffle?
No.
Okay, here we go. I'll just go in the middle because I'm a
Yeah.
middleman. Okay?
Look, you'll pick the one that you need to pick. Let's hear what it is.
What are my best qualities? So I have to be honest.
Okay.
My best qualities is my love for life. My love for life. That's my best qualities. Is everything is possible. I think that possibilities are there. Is being able to go through challenges. I think obstacles are a blessing in disguise. I really believe that. It's because there's a door somewhere. And it's for us to have the courage to open those doors. Loyalty to my friends and family. I think I'm creative. I was always considered as a storyteller as a child. And when I did systemic therapy, they said this is you're Mr. Metaphor. You do metaphors. So I have this, I have creativity, I would say. Out of the box thinking. That's it.
I think that's a pretty neat list.
Is
Loyalty, loving life, creativity, out of the box thinker,
and
overall
possibilities.
And possibility, and overall just a good person.
Yeah.
A mensch.
Ah.
With
Yeah.
that, sir. Thanks so much.
Thank you much. Thanks a lot.
Amazing.